okay, so you can't break every story as easily, or perhaps not in the shape that you want, especially not when it comes to geopolitics. But then also you mentioned, which I think is very interesting, because I did not pick up on that at all last year. You said, okay, I already saw this sort of World War III narrative last year. So my question really is, like, what were the signals last year that you picked up? And then maybe as a follow-up, what couldn't you write about it? Like, what did they say?
Well, I think, one of the early things that I was interested in was the lab leak theory, for example. And I found that to be the entire media response to that narrative, I found very confusing, because it seemed a credible theory for me from very early on. And I thought there was enough evidence and public domain evidence to, at a minimum, to warrant an investigation to see if there's anything in it. And there seemed to be a terrible taboo and stigma with raising this. And unless you're in a position of authority or within a remit where you can raise these sort of topics in editorial, environments, and most people aren't in that position because they seem, I was the editor of Alphaville, but even for me, saying, I think we should do this story, it seems like you're putting it yourself out there, because the risk is someone deems you a conspiracy theorist, and you end up kind of compromising yourself internally and your own reputation. So I felt kind of frustrated. So I started making my own inquiries just because I found the story interesting. And around February last year, I think, I became quite convinced that there was a story there at a minimum that we had to cover. Long story short, there was a bit of resistance in following it up. And then eventually by sort of May, it became clear that this was a legitimate avenue of inquiry. And I was put on the story, which is great. But I found it very frustrating how the story was being managed and how we could cooperate or not cooperate. And I felt, so the reason I'm telling this story is that it was in the process of thinking about these issues and the aftermath and the consequences and the geopolitics related to China and also to Russia's role within those geopolitics that made me realize quite early on that there was going to be an aftermath, and that aftermath did not look like it was going to be a good aftermath. So my inclination was, that combined with the economic fragility that we were facing, and the again, I was very concerned about inflation very early on, and that was another taboo subject, I feel, in certain serious corners, because it is such a it is such a sort of Bitcoiner narrative or whatever. But when the facts change, you have to change your mind. Yeah. And I felt like that was impeding sensible journalism, because there was such a fear of being branded X or Y. I mean, I don't want to lots of people might have had different reasons for not thinking there was going to be inflation, but I just felt there was a lot of stigma and a lot of pressure. And when I did try to go out there, because before, when Alphaville would go a bit out there with different theories, which did end up being true in the long run, the resistance was usually external, and when it became sort of more internal, it felt a little bit frustrating, because you feel like a newspaper should be the sort of place where you can tolerate different perspectives, and as long as the argument is as long as the logic is well argued, I think it's fair. I entertained on Alphaville many different perspectives I didn't necessarily agree with myself. As long as they were well argued and presented in a convincing and credible way, I think it was fair enough. So that's the context.
Yeah. Okay. So what I found very interesting about this already is that sort of I actually had a little bit of a similar experience in academia, in the sense that I always thought, like, okay, academia, universities, that's the place where you can entertain new ideas, right? New radical ideas in economics, in my case, because I'm an economist. And then I found out, like, as a PhD student, that's really not the case, because then you don't get published. And there's actually very strong gatekeeping and pretty strong communal narrative. I don't know if you can say that, but like common narrative. If you stray outside of that, and that's actually partially what motivated me to move from university to YouTube. So I see some parallels there.